My name is Leo Martel. For the better part of my 34 years, I have been a student of the quiet things. The way moss claims the north side of a Douglas fir, the patient architecture of a river stone, the particular silence of a forest after a heavy rain. I am a landscape architect in Portland, Oregon, a profession I chose because it is about creating harmony from chaos, about understanding that growth requires the right conditions, a sturdy foundation, and the discipline to prune what is no longer serving the whole. I've built my life on these principles, crafting a small, orderly world for myself in a craftsman bungalow in the Laurelhurst neighborhood, a world of clean lines, thriving plants, and the gentle hum of solitude. My family, however, has never been a place of quiet harmony. They are a whirlwind of noise, of unspoken obligations and loudly stated needs, of a love that often felt more like a debt I was perpetually failing to repay. For years, I played my part. I was the steady one, the reliable son, the brother who could be counted on. I was the one who co-signed the loan, who showed up with a toolbox when the plumbing failed, who paid for the vacations they planned and the emergencies they created. I did it not out of obligation, but from a deep, persistent hope that one day, my efforts would be seen not as a resource to be tapped, but as an expression of care. I hoped that eventually, they would see me. That hope died on a bright, cloudless Sunday in May, over the clatter of silverware and the performative laughter of Brunch. The place was called the Gilded Sparrow, one of those aggressively trendy spots downtown with reclaimed wood tables and a menu where every ingredient had a backstory. The air was thick with the scent of artisanal coffee and self-satisfaction. We were all there, my mother, Isabel, her smile as bright and brittle as spun sugar, my father, Richard, a man who had long ago retreated into a fortress of silence, my younger sister, Nina, scrolling through her phone as if the world beyond its screen were a tedious waiting room, and my Uncle Martin, my mother's brother, a man who laughed too loudly at his own jokes. It was my mother who arranged these gatherings, framing them as essential touchstones for keeping the family connected. In reality, they were often stages for her to perform the role of the benevolent matriarch, a role that required an audience and, more often than not, a target for her subtle, cutting remarks. For years, that target had been me. We were discussing the family's upcoming summer trip to the Tidewater Cottage, the small cabin on the Oregon coast that I had bought 5 years prior. They had all fallen in love with its rugged charm, the scent of salt and pine, the view of the ocean from the weathered deck. They called it the family cottage, a collective term that conveniently erased the fact that I held the deed, paid the mortgage, and had personally funded the new roof and septic system last fall. "We'll need to make sure the pantry is stocked before we all head down," my mother said, dabbing her lips with a linen napkin. "Martin, you'll bring the good wine. Nina, you're on dessert duty. And Leo," she turned to me, her eyes gleaming with a familiar, predatory light, "you can handle the practical things. You're so good at that." Uncle Martin chuckled. He's the family fixer. Our own personal ATM and handyman rolled into one. I felt the familiar tightening in my chest, a quiet bracing for impact. I offered a thin smile and said nothing, focusing on the swirl of cream in my coffee. Then my mother leaned forward slightly, her voice dropping into a conspiratorial tone, loud enough for the whole table to hear. "Oh, we're just trying to be kind, Leo," she said, her smile widening. "It's a family thing. You should try it sometime." A beat of silence, and then my uncle exploded with laughter. It wasn't a small chuckle. It was a loud, booming laugh that turned heads at the next table, the kind of laugh that signals the successful landing of a particularly cruel joke at a roast. Nina didn't look up from her phone, but the corner of her mouth twitched. And my father said nothing. He just meticulously cut a piece of his omelet, lifted the fork to his mouth, and chewed, his gaze fixed on his plate as if my mother had just commented on the decor. His silence was not a neutral act, it was an endorsement. It was a cavernous, echoing void where a defense, or even just a glance of solidarity, should have been. In that moment, something inside me didn't break, it clarified. The years of quiet resentment, of swallowed frustration, of hoping for a change that would never come, coalesced into a single, cold, Hard point of understanding. This wasn't a family. It was a system, and I was not a member. I was a utility. The shame that washed over me was not for myself, but for my own stubborn, foolish hope. I had come to this table as a son and a brother, and they had, with a casual laugh and a father's silence, relegated me to the role of a strange, uncooperative guest. I didn't get angry. I didn't raise my voice. The architect in me, the part that valued structure and deliberate action, took over. I took one slow, final sip of my coffee. The bitterness of it felt appropriate. I placed the mug back on its saucer with a quiet click, nodded once to no one in particular, and stood up. I slid my chair back under the table, turned, and walked away. No one called my name. No one asked where I was going. I walked out of the Gilded Sparrow and into the blindingly bright sunlight, the sound of my uncle's fading laughter trailing behind me like a bad omen. I got into my car and drove home through the familiar streets of Portland, with the windows down and the radio off. The wind whipped through the car, but it couldn't touch the profound stillness that had settled deep inside me. By the time I pulled into my driveway, the plan was already formed. It wouldn't be a demolition. It would be a careful, quiet, and complete disassembly. My life had become a network of invisible supports holding up my family's comfort, and I began to dismantle it that same afternoon with the methodical calm of a surgeon. The first to go was the Tidewater Cottage. I loved that place. I had spent weekends there alone, planning the native plant garden that now thrived in the salty air, choosing the deep blue tiles for the bathroom, sanding and refinishing the old pine floors myself. It was my sanctuary, but they had turned it into another one of their assets, a stage for their family gatherings where my ownership was an inconvenient footnote. I logged into my account with the Coastal Realty Group, opened the draft listing I had created months ago during a moment of profound frustration, and clicked publish. The description was honest, the photos were beautiful. It was a desirable property. I knew it wouldn't take long. It sold in 4 days. A cash offer, slightly above asking price, from a couple in Seattle looking for a weekend escape. I accepted it without a counteroffer. By the following Tuesday, the sale was in escrow. The shared online calendar where my mother meticulously scheduled family weekends at the cottage would soon be obsolete. I felt a pang, not of regret, but of loss for the dream the cottage had once represented, a place of shared joy. But the reality had poisoned the dream, and I was choosing reality. Next was the shared credit line. I had opened it 2 years ago when their water heater had burst. It was under my name, a card from the Willamette Valley Credit Union that I had given them for emergencies. Soon, emergencies became new patio furniture, a top-of-the-line grill, and a series of online shopping sprees from my mother. I had been quietly paying down the balance for months, a silent tax on my income. I logged into my online banking portal, found the account, and clicked the button to close it permanently. An email confirmed the action within minutes. The bank would handle the notification. Finally, I turned to the web of digital subscriptions. They were all linked to my Veridian Prime account, a household I had set up so they could benefit from my membership. My sister Nina, my mother, and even my uncle were all connected, using my free shipping and streaming services while paying with their own cards. It was a small thing, a minor expense, but it was another thread in the tapestry of their dependence. I navigated to the account settings, reported suspicious activity on the linked household accounts, a vague but effective strategy, and submitted a request to dissolve the household sharing feature entirely, citing privacy concerns. For 2 weeks, a strange silence fell. I went to work, tended my garden, and slept more soundly than I had in years. It was the quiet before the storm, the eerie calm when the pressure drops. I was waiting, not with anxiety, but with a sense of inevitability. The storm broke on a Wednesday evening. My phone, which had been blissfully silent, began to vibrate incessantly. It was the family group chat, a digital space I usually kept muted. Nina, did anyone else's Veridian account get shut down? It's saying my membership is invalid. I have stuff in my cart. A cousin, Evan, hey, was trying to book the cottage for August and the listing is gone. The whole calendar is wiped. What's going on? My mother, Isabel? 3 question marks. The epitome of her communication style, a demand for information wrapped in a cloak of bewildered innocence. They were pieces of a puzzle they couldn't yet see, their individual comforts disrupted, their shared world beginning to fray at the edges. None of them messaged me directly. None of them mentioned the brunch. It was as if I were an invisible force, a change in the weather they were complaining about without considering the climate. I watched the messages scroll by, feeling a profound and unsettling detachment. This was their world, a world built on my silent acquiescence, and it was beginning to crumble. Then, at 9:47 p.m., my phone rang. It was not a number I recognized. I hesitated, then answered, a cold premonition settling in my stomach. "Leo Martel?" a woman's voice asked. It was crisp, professional, and devoid of warmth. "This is he," I said. "My name is Eleanor Hayes. I'm an attorney representing your parents, Isabel and Richard Martel. I'm calling regarding some ongoing family financial arrangements. Do you have a moment to speak?" I had misheard, I thought. An attorney? But the cold clarity in her voice told me I hadn't. The family that preached about keeping things in the family had just made their first move, and they had outsourced it. The disassembly was no longer a one-sided affair. I stood in my kitchen, the phone pressed to my ear, listening to the disembodied voice of a stranger who was now an arbiter in my family's affairs. I didn't speak, letting the silence stretch. "Mr. Martel?" Eleanor Hayes prompted, her tone unwavering. "I'm here," I said, my voice quiet. "Good," she continued, as if ticking a box on a list. "Your father, Richard, has requested the return of the vehicle you gifted to him 3 years ago. It's a 2021 Subaru Outback Gray. He intends to transfer the title to a business associate. While we acknowledge it was a gift, he is formally requesting its immediate return." For a moment, I just stared out my window at the darkening silhouette of the West Hills. The car. Of course. It was the last major, tangible asset they had a claim to, however tenuous. I'd bought it for him when his old sedan finally gave out, a gesture of love for a father who had taught me to drive. He had been genuinely moved at the time, his rare smile reaching his eyes. Now, that memory felt tainted, repurposed as leverage. It wasn't about the car, it was about power. It was a message: we can still take things from you. You do not get to walk away clean. A surge of anger, hot and sharp, rose in my throat, but I pushed it down. Reacting with emotion was what they expected. It's what they fed on. When and where? I asked, my voice as level as hers. There was a slight pause on her end, a flicker of surprise. She had likely been briefed to expect a fight, an argument, an emotional outburst. My calm compliance had thrown her off script. "Tomorrow at 1 o'clock would be suitable." "At your parents' residence," she said, recovering quickly. She gave me the address I knew as well as my own. "I'll be there," I said, and hung up before she could add another word. The next morning, I drove the Subaru to a car wash and had it detailed, inside and out. I emptied the glove compartment of my spare charging cable, the insurance and registration cards printed with my name, and a pair of old sunglasses. I vacuumed the floor mats and wiped down the dashboard. It felt less like a surrender and more like a final closing of an account, a meticulous zeroing of a balance. This car was a vessel of memories of road trips to the mountain, of helping him move lumber for a backyard project, of quiet drives where the silence between us felt companionable rather than strained. I was letting go of the car, but more importantly, I was letting go of the hope embedded within those memories. At exactly 1 p.m., I pulled into their driveway in the Selwood neighborhood. The house looked the same patchy lawn my father was always meaning to reseed, the same azalea bushes I had planted for my mother one Mother's Day, now overgrown and unkempt. The place felt heavy with the weight of unresolved history. I rang the doorbell. My mother answered, her face a carefully constructed mask of pained disappointment. Behind her, my father stood with his arms crossed, his expression unreadable, a stony sentinel in his own home. And on the sofa, visible in the living room behind them, was Nina. She was lounging with her phone held up, pretending to be absorbed, but her posture was tense. She was an audience member pretending not to watch the play. "Leo," my mother began, her voice soft and wounded. "We need to talk." This has all gone too far. I didn't move to step inside. I stood on the welcome mat, the threshold a clear boundary. I held out the keys. I'm here to return the car as requested by your lawyer. The word lawyer made her flinch. That was just a formality, a misunderstanding, she said quickly, waving a dismissive hand. We're family, Leo. Families don't involve lawyers. We talk things out. We had a chance to talk at brunch, I said, my voice calm and low. I'm done talking now. That's when Nina finally sat up, her phone clattering onto the couch. Oh my God, are you serious? She said, her voice dripping with scorn. You're throwing away your entire family over one comment? Mom was stressed. You're taking everything so personally. You always do this. You twist things and act like a martyr. I just looked at her indignant face, at the comfortable way she sat in a house I knew she hadn't been contributing to for months. Her words were like stones thrown into a deep well. I could hear them hit the water, but they couldn't touch me at the top. She was defending the system that benefited her. You're wrong, Leo, she continued, her voice rising. You're so wrong about all of this, and you're going to regret burning every bridge with the people who actually care about you. When? I wanted to ask. When did you care? When I paid your security deposit. When I fixed your laptop. When did the caring happen? But I didn't say it. There was no point. It would be like arguing with the rain. I placed the keys on the wrought iron railing of the porch. They made a small, metallic sound, a sound of finality. Goodbye, I said, looking from my mother's shocked face to my father's impassive one. I turned and walked back down the driveway without looking back. My mother called my name once, her voice sharp with a mixture of anger and panic. My father, as always, said nothing. I didn't have the Subaru anymore, so I walked to the corner and ordered a ride. As I sat in the back of the Prius, watching the familiar street signs of my childhood roll by, I didn't feel victorious or sad. I just felt quiet. The noise had finally stopped. When I got home, I opened my laptop, went to my bank's website, and navigated to the scheduled payments page. I found the recurring monthly transfer of $1,200 labeled Nina Rent. The payment for June 1st was only a week away. She'd lost her job in marketing back in February, citing a toxic work environment, and had asked for help just until she got back on her feet. I had agreed without question. 2 weeks later, she'd posted a picture of herself on a weekend wellness retreat in Bend with the caption, "Investing in myself." I had felt a sting of resentment then, but had done nothing. I kept paying. March, April, May. I looked at the scheduled transfer for June. And with a single, decisive click, I canceled it. The morning after I canceled Nina's rent transfer, my phone erupted. It was a multi-front assault of guilt, confusion, and rage. 10 missed calls from her, each one followed by a voicemail that escalated in tone. The first was confused. "Hey, Leo, weird question, but did you cancel the rent transfer? My landlord just sent a reminder. Probably just a bank glitch. Call me." The second was panicked. "Leo, seriously, call me back. The payment didn't go through. They're going to charge me a late fee. I don't have it. What is going on?" The third was pure, unfiltered fury. "Are you kidding me? This is how you're doing this? After everything, you're just going to leave me to get evicted because your feelings got hurt at brunch? You are being unbelievably cruel. You know I'm struggling." I listened to them all, one after the other, my coffee growing cold in my hands. The word she used, cruel, hung in the air. Was it cruel to stop setting myself on fire to keep her warm? I didn't reply. By afternoon, the family group chat, which had been dormant, roared back to life. It was no longer about disconnected inconveniences. It was a full-blown crisis, and I was the clear villain. Cousins I hadn't spoken to in months were chiming in, asking what had happened. Uncle Martin sent a sanctimonious voice note about how family is supposed to lift each other up, not tear each other down. My mother sent a long, meandering paragraph that read like a press release from a failed therapy session. "Communication is the only path to healing," it began. "We all need to find it in our hearts to listen to each other's pain and find a way forward together. Resentment is a poison we feed ourselves." There was still no apology, no acknowledgement of the brunch, just a vague, sweeping indictment of a lack of communication, as if the problem were a faulty telephone line and not the words that had been sent across it. I ignored it all. I put my phone on silent and went for a long run along the waterfront, the rhythm of my feet on the pavement a steady, grounding beat against the chaos. For the first time, I was letting their storm rage without me in the middle of it, trying to hold up the roof. The next morning, just after the sun had risen, a new message appeared in the chat. It was from my father. Seeing his name pop up was so unusual that I sat up in bed, instantly awake. He never wrote in the group. He was a silent observer, a digital ghost. The message was a single, unadorned sentence. If this behavior doesn't stop, everyone who doesn't live here will no longer be welcome in this house. The words landed with the force of a gavel. They were stark, cold, and utterly unambiguous. It was so profoundly out of character that for a moment, I wondered if his phone had been hacked. But I knew it was him. This was the other side of his silence, not apathy, but a deep, pressurized stillness that, once disturbed, erupted with tectonic force. Nina's reply came less than a minute later. "Nina, wait, what are you talking about? I live there." She had typed it out, a public admission of what I had already suspected. Her Instagram stories had been telling the tale for weeks, grainy photos of her cat on my parents' ugly floral sofa, selfies taken in the familiar beige bathroom, the corner of my father's overflowing bookshelf in the background. She hadn't lost her apartment. She had moved back home, likely weeks ago, while still collecting my rent money for a place she no longer occupied. My $1,200 a month wasn't for her survival, it was for her lifestyle. It was for wellness retreats and new clothes and brunches with friends where she could complain about her toxic family. My father did not reply to her. A few minutes later, my mother tried to do damage control. "Your father is under a great deal of stress," she wrote. "He doesn't mean it the way it sounds. What we all need now is compassion." She was trying to translate him, to soften the blow, to reframe his direct command as an emotional outburst. But everyone knew he meant it exactly the way it sounded. The group chat fell dead. The usual flurry of reactions, the likes, the hearts, the confused replies, was absent. My father's message was a line drawn not in the sand, but in concrete. Uncle Martin attempted to lighten the mood a few hours later with a pathetic, "How about a family barbecue this weekend? Burgers fix everything." No one responded. Not a single thumbs up. The silence was deafening. That night, I took a long walk through my neighborhood. The air was cool and smelled of damp earth and blooming jasmine. I walked past well-tended gardens and houses glowing with warm light, and I thought about my father. For my entire life, I had interpreted his silence as weakness, as a passive refusal to engage in the family's emotional turmoil. I had resented him for it, for leaving me to navigate my mother's moods and my sister's needs alone. But now, a new understanding began to dawn on me. Perhaps his silence wasn't weakness at all. Perhaps he was like me, an observer, a student of the quiet things. Perhaps he had been watching for years, his frustration building slowly, patiently, like sediment at the bottom of a river. The brunch, the lawyer, my own quiet withdrawal, maybe it hadn't just been a catalyst for me. Maybe it had finally stirred that sediment for him, too. When I returned to my bungalow, the quiet inside felt different. It wasn't the lonely quiet of an empty house, it was the peaceful quiet of a sanctuary. I looked around at my plants, my books, the clean, uncluttered surfaces. For the first time in a very long time, my life felt entirely my own. The network of invisible supports was gone, and I was still standing. In fact, I was standing taller. The silence stretched. 3 days. A week. Then 2. The family group chat remained a digital graveyard. I removed the notification from my home screen and then, a few days later, deleted the thread itself. It felt like clearing away dead leaves from a garden bed. Life began to flow back into the spaces that their drama had occupied. My mind, which had been a cluttered attic of anxieties and resentments, began to clear. At work, I found a new level of focus. I dove into a challenging new project, designing a public healing garden for a local hospital, and the ideas came easily, unburdened by the constant, low-grade hum of family tension. I started sleeping through the night, a deep, uninterrupted rest that had been a stranger to me for years. I reclaimed my weekends. I drove out to the Columbia River Gorge and hiked until my legs ached and my mind was filled with nothing but the roar of the waterfalls and the vastness of the sky. I spent a Saturday volunteering at an animal shelter, a small act of service that filled me with a simple, uncomplicated sense of purpose. I was rebuilding my life around my own values, not in reaction to their needs. I was pruning and new growth was beginning to show. One Tuesday, nearly 3 weeks after the car incident, a single, handwritten letter arrived in my mailbox. The envelope was plain, with no return address, but I recognized the tight, neat block lettering of my father's hand immediately. My heart hammered against my ribs as I slid it open. The note inside was written on a single sheet of plain paper. It was short and to the point. Leo, you were right to leave. I was quiet for too long and I let things get broken. That is on me. You don't owe anyone anything. You never did. Whatever peace you have found, you hold on to it. Dad. I read it once, then twice, then a third time. My vision blurred. It wasn't an apology in the way my mother would have crafted one, flowery, emotional, and ultimately self-serving. It was better than an apology. It was an acknowledgement. It was a release. The two sentences, "You don't owe anyone anything. You never did," were a key turning a lock I didn't even realize I had been trapped behind. He saw it. He finally saw it. And in his own quiet, deliberate way, he was telling me so. I didn't call him. I didn't text him. The letter was not an invitation for a conversation, it was a closing statement. I folded it carefully and placed it in the top drawer of my desk, a tangible piece of proof that I hadn't been imagining everything. A week after that, I received another call, this time from my cousin Alex, the one who generally stayed out of the fray. "Hey Leo," he said, his voice hesitant. "Just wanted to check in. Things are weird over there." "How so?" I asked, keeping my tone neutral. "Nina's not at the house anymore," he said. "She showed up at my brother's place a few days ago with a suitcase. Said your dad told her she had until the end of the week to find somewhere else to live." Apparently, he meant what he said. I listened, a strange sense of calm washing over me. "And your mom," Alex continued, "she's a wreck. But it's weird. She's not mad at you anymore. She's mad at him. Says he's dismantling the family, that he's become cold and unreasonable. He took her name off their main checking account. She had to call him to get money for groceries. It's a full-blown civil war, man." The image was stark, my silent, passive father, finally taking control of the house he had long retreated from. He wasn't just supporting my boundary, he was building his own. The system hadn't just lost a utility, its very foundation had fractured. That night, I sat on my small porch, nursing a beer and looking out at the Portland sky, a canvas of soft gray and dusky pink. I thought about the brunch, the car, the cottage, the letter. The chain of events felt less like a series of dramatic explosions and more like the slow, necessary collapse of a structure that was unsound from the beginning. I wasn't free because I had one. I was free because I had stopped playing the game. The next day, I accepted a promotion at work. And then I did something I had never done before. I booked a flight and a small, isolated rental cabin for 2 weeks. Not on the Oregon coast, but in the high desert of Arizona, a place of stark beauty, clear skies, and profound silence. It was a trip for no one but myself. There would be no obligations, no expectations, no one to please. Just me, the sun, and the vast, quiet landscape. Healing, I've learned, isn't always a gentle process. Sometimes it's a quiet, brutal disassembly. It's taking apart the things you thought you couldn't live without, piece by piece, until you're left with only what is essential, what is true, what is yours. And in the quiet space that remains, you can finally begin to build again. It has been 2 months since I returned from Arizona. The silence from my family has become the new normal. My cousin tells me that Nina is living with a friend and has started a new job, that my mother and father are cohabitating in a state of cold, quiet tension. They're navigating the ruins of the world they built. I harbor no ill will. I don't wish them pain. But I do not wish to return to their orbit. My father's letter remains in my desk drawer. I haven't spoken to him, but we have, in our own separate silences, reached a kind of understanding. He gave me my freedom, and in doing so, perhaps he began to find his own. My life is quiet now. It is filled with the scent of damp soil from my garden, the warmth of the sun on my face during my lunch break walks, the satisfaction of a blueprint well drawn. It is a life built not on the shifting sands of familial obligation, but on the bedrock of self-respect. It's a smaller world, perhaps, than the one I used to inhabit, but it is solid. And for the first time, it is entirely my own.